Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Wednesday, January 31st, day 117 of the war with Hamas. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our political correspondent Sam Sokol and news editor Amy Spiro. Hello to you both.
Morning.
Good morning.
We are going to hear about how members of the Knesset House Committee overwhelmingly supported a motion to expel Hadash Ta'al party lawmaker Ofer Kassif yesterday. A Tel Aviv University report recommends shuttering the diaspora ministry. We'll hear why. Amy, who heads our Those We Have Lost project, memorializing the citizens and soldiers who have fallen in the Israel-Hamas war, has noticed a moving trend among mourners. All this and much, much more when we're back. First, some headlines. Today, a delegation of Hamas officials is expected to meet with Egyptian intelligence chief to discuss a potential truce for hostages deal. The Israel Defense Forces said yesterday that it had been flooding some tunnels in the Gaza Strip with seawater, confirming what had been an open secret for several weeks. Police announced the death of Sergeant First Class Ran Gvili, who was killed by Hamas on October 7th with his body abducted to Gaza. The Israel Defense Forces also announced the deaths of 3 soldiers who were killed while fighting in Gaza yesterday, bringing the military death toll from the ground offensive to 223. And some good news. The Water Authority says water levels in the Sea of Galilee rose by 15 centimeters, some 6 inches, over the past 24 hours as a result of heavy rains. Sam, let's turn to the 14-2 vote to advance member of Knesset Ofer Kassif's impeachment. What happened in the debate? But before you get into that, I would like to remind our listeners who Ofer Kassif is and what is his party.
So Ofer Kassif is the only Jewish member of the overwhelmingly Arab Hadash Ta'al list, and he is one of the more hard-left members of the Knesset. He has a long history of raising the hackles of his opponents on the right, and he has long been controversial within the Knesset. Now, after the war started, he signed on to a public petition expressing support for South Africa's motion in the International Court of Justice accusing Israel of genocide. Now, he wasn't a party to the actual lawsuit in the International Court of Justice. You need to be a state actor in order to do that, but his signature on this petition was interpreted by many members of Knesset as support for Hamas. The argument went that if you support forcing Israel to stop the war, you leave Israel defenseless, and this is essentially providing support for Hamas. Now, Kassif did not agree, and Chaver Knesset Oded Forer from the right-wing Yisrael Beitenu party decided to try to invoke a previously never used part of the law, which allows for the impeachment of an MK if they support incitement to racism or armed struggle against the state of Israel. Now, government legal advisors have stated on more than one occasion that they do not believe that Kassif's actions, no matter how odious they have appeared to many of his colleagues across the spectrum, meet that legal bar. He did nothing actionable in terms of actually assisting Hamas, which he has said that he abhors, but his colleagues have decided to move ahead with the impeachment. They managed to gather 85 signatures from lawmakers, allowing the matter to go to committee, where it passed after 2 days of incredibly contentious debate, 14-2. The next step will be to bring it to the full Knesset plenum, where it will require a supermajority of 90 lawmakers to actually expel Kassif. Now, whether or not this will succeed is an open question. I've heard some lawmakers, including supporters of the impeachment, express cynicism about the process. They don't believe that it's going to pass. And it's also run into quite a bit of backlash from more moderate and left-leaning parties who have essentially said, even if we disagree with what he has said and what he has done, this is anti-democratic. This is nullifying the will of the voters. So this is one of those really hot-button issues, and I can't see this doing anything but further dividing Israelis during this period. Certainly the debates within the Knesset would frequently over the past 2 days descend into acrimony, mutual accusations, screaming matches, and insults. And when I don't expect it to be any different once it reaches the plenum.
What's the timeline on that, Sam?
So we don't have a timeline at the moment. My understanding is that this becomes something of a political process at this point, where maybe there'll be some horse trading in the background, trying to gain support for one position or another, and the timing of the actual hearing could be influenced by that.
Last week, a report from Tel Aviv University Center for the Study of Contemporary European Jewry argued that the Diaspora Affairs and Combating Anti-Semitism Ministry was established, quote, for petty political reason, quote, lacks vision and substance, and has, quote, promoted few initiatives. So I just wonder what makes that different than most other ministries, Sam?
You have admirable cynicism there. Well, the truth is that I used to cover this ministry back when I reported on diaspora affairs. And even as someone whose main job revolved around diaspora and who dealt with the ministry on a regular basis, I always had a bit of a question hanging over me as to what they actually did. They don't do a lot. They do fund some security initiatives for Jewish communities abroad. They put out an anti-Semitism report once a year. And under Naftali Bennett, around a decade ago, there was a push by the ministry to establish a global diaspora apparatus, which largely failed. Now, the criticisms of the ministry have also been shared by some members of Israel's diplomatic community. I've spoken to members of the Israeli Foreign Service who have essentially said that they don't understand the point of the ministry because it doesn't have people on the ground. That in terms of the Israeli Foreign Ministry, the diplomatic service, you have diplomats on the ground in different countries. They understand local conditions. They can liaise with local communities, and they can lobby for issues related to anti-Semitism because they know the political landscape. And the diaspora ministry has none of that. So when I was working on this story, I reached out to the diaspora ministry, which declined to respond. But I also did speak to former diaspora minister Nachman Shai. And what former Minister Shai said was interesting. While he declined to comment on current problems with the ministry itself, he said he feels that's important that there is a ministerial position in the cabinet which can serve as sort of a representative of diaspora Jewry. So the question, I guess, is whether or not the ministry does enough to justify its existence, and if it doesn't, whether the solution would be A, to shutter the ministry, or B, to improve it, because, as Shai said, it is a worthwhile endeavor to have somebody representing diaspora concerns at that political level.
And perhaps he put somebody in that position that the diaspora actually wants to speak with, which may or may not be the case with Minister Amichai Shikli. Sam, thank you so much for your insights today.
It's a pleasure.
We'll go to a short break. And we're back. Amy, you have headed up our Those We Have Lost series since very shortly after October 7th. How are we standing in terms of the number of people that we've covered so far?
Yeah, so we actually, as of this recording, have published exactly 400 posts. And if I've done the tally correctly, that represents 485 people we've written about. Obviously, there are a number of posts that are about families, couples, etc. So obviously a significant number, but still a large ways to go.
Each story is so affecting. And while we're reading them, we've both noticed several different trends. One trend that you brought to my attention yesterday was that more than half of the people who were slaughtered were under the age of 30. Explain that figure.
Yeah, so that's a statistic that's been proven out by the numbers. You know, like you, when I saw it, it was, a bit of a gut punch, but also not surprising, really, because a huge number of those killed, more than 350, were at the Supernova Music Festival, which definitely had a younger crowd. Most of the ones that we're writing from there, these were 20, 21, 22, 23. So the majority of those are under 30, and there are also several hundred soldiers who were killed, and the majority of those were under 30. So when you look at the overall figure, yeah, it's pretty astonishing, but not surprising.
One of the other things I've noted in reading the stories of those who were slain at the supernova is that so many of these youth were religious at one point and left religion, and they were at this party, which of course was on Shabbat and on a holiday. It was something that we're considering looking into. Another trend that you've brought to our attention is the trend of families, mourners, friends, getting tattoos to memorialize the victims.
Yeah, it's definitely a story that came out of, without a doubt, of this project. Something that over and over again I was seeing when I was writing these stories and writing these obituaries, that many people, including right away, including during the Shiva at the Shloshim, which is 30 days, were getting tattoos to memorialize. Certainly it's more pronounced among, the supernova victims, where tattoos are, sort of a big part of the culture, but not just, definitely among other groups as well. And so many of those, many people have been getting the date of October 7th tattooed somewhere. But many I've seen have been, which, is interesting and moving, have been essentially copying tattoos that their loved ones had. And so taking a tattoo that someone they loved who was killed had, and in many cases, large groups of friends or families getting the same one. So it's something that I wanted to explore, and you gave me the space to do that.
Yes. So we have a feature that should be published shortly, delving into this, in which you discussed the trend with several tattoo artists who they themselves see tattooing as a form of therapy. And many of them offered their services voluntarily immediately after. One woman, I remember, stated that she worked for a whole month for free, essentially to fulfill the demand of these people who want to become, as you write in the piece, a living memorial.
Yeah, so the tattoo artist you're speaking about, Shelly Eliel, she lives on a kibbutz that had a lot of evacuees. And she told me that the first few weeks, she really just couldn't work. And like most of us, was just sort of like in shock and stuck next to the TV. And, her kids were home. And then, she was talking to an evacuee who said they really wanted to get a tattoo. And it just sort of like clicked something. And she put out this call and she said, people were just coming constantly. And after a month, she had to stop giving her services away for free. But she did dozens of people who really wanted, who felt it was really important to them to get a tattoo, to sort of process their pain and their loss. And, one thing she said to me was that she could understand, wanting to turn their emotional pain into physical pain, that the fact that a tattoo is painful, it's a needle, right? It causes physical pain, is something that she could understand people seeking out in a way. And that a lot of her sessions were very emotional and people would cry, and there was a lot of talking and processing during the process even.
You mentioned in your piece one former politician who had the date inscribed on his body. And of course, anyone who sees numbers on an arm just cannot help but think of the Holocaust. And if I'm not mistaken, he made an overt tie to this, no?
Yes, Chaim Yellen, who's maybe the politician most closely associated with that part of the country. He's from Kibbutz Be'eri himself, has lived there for many years. He's a native of Argentina, but he's lived there for decades. And so he's become one of the most prominent voices since October 7th. And yeah, not long after, I think it was around 10 days, it was really the first tattoo that I saw post everything happening. He tattooed the date 7/10/23 on the inside of his forearm, very deliberately, very saying, this is the statement I'm trying to make. This is the connection we need to draw. This is the moment that we need to remember forever. And so, people getting the date, certainly they've been getting them all over, but a lot of people have definitely been getting them on their forearm, and it's not a coincidence.
Amy, I read all of the articles and you write the lion's share of them, but I want to bring awareness to one person that you didn't actually write about. His name is Chief Warrant Officer Ido Credo Rosenthal. And if you read this article, it just sounds like something from an action film. He was a member of the Air Force's Elite Shaldag unit. And on the morning of October 7th, when he heard about the massacre occurring, he grabbed his gun and rushed to meet up with his unit. And he boarded a helicopter heading south towards the kibbutz. The helicopter dropped them off a short distance away from the epicenter of the battle. And they approached Be'eri in a military vehicle. And fighting ensued. He killed at least 10 of the terrorists, but his unit took heavy losses. Now, during the battle, one of his fellow soldiers was shot in the hand and the chest, and Rosenthal checked out the soldier's wounds and sent him away from the front lines to hide in the vehicle. And the soldier later said that he heard another volley of bullets and turned to see Rosenthal himself was killed on the spot through the neck. Another thing that drew me to his story is his name, Credo, his nickname, which, according to Globes, came from his grandmother, who called him Queridos, forgive my Spanish, which means dear. And his name in the army morphed together with his first name, Ido, and so it became short for Crazy Ido Credo. Just really an amazing story of a real-life action hero who fell on October 7th. Do you have a story you'd like to share, Amy?
You know, there's so many. As you've noted, I have written the majority we've had so far, which is in the hundreds at this point. So obviously to say they all stay with me is as a cliche, but it's not wrong in a way. And it's interesting that you picked Ido because, one that's really stuck with me is sort of on the opposite end of the scenario, right? I wrote recently about Noam Avramovich, who was killed on her third day on base. She had just started. She had finished her training. She enlisted in the summer. Her mother dropped her off on Thursday, October 5th. And listening to her mother at the funeral sort of say, I didn't want to leave you there. I didn't want to drop you off there so close to the border. It felt wrong. And, just thinking about her being so brand new. She had no idea what she was doing. She had no experience, zero idea. I don't think she was on duty at the time, right? So many of the people who were killed were just on the base. They were off duty and they were seeking shelter. And they were not all killed in battle. So that's definitely one that stuck with me. Again, there are so many others. I mean, one I wrote, a short while ago, about Tammy Peleg Ziv. It stayed with me because of her own history, her own family story that in some way feels so wrapped up with the history of the state of Israel, right? Her brother was killed fighting in the Yom Kippur War, which was almost 50 years to the date of October 7th. And then on October 7th, 2004, which again is this like strange, spooky coincidence, her daughter was murdered in a terror attack, in the Sinai. And so that sort of time of year, having all these things happen to her, all these things which sort of reflect, the history of the state, was definitely something that I've stuck with me and I've thought about a lot.
Amy, every night when I read your pieces, tears come to my eyes, and I find it I'm so grateful to you that you're bringing these human portraits to life, really. So keep up the hard work. I know it is not easy emotionally or physically to complete all of these pieces, but I am so grateful.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I hope people are reading and feeling the same way.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have a question or comment about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.